We talk a lot about digital currencies on this show.
We do.
About the technology, the
Yeah.
potential for faster payments,
Uh-huh.
all that good
Lots of
stuff.
possibilities.
But here's a stat that might surprise you.
Okay.
As of late 2023,
Late 2023.
a full 94%
Wow.
of central banks
Yeah.
that were surveyed
Okay.
said they were actively exploring
Exploring.
central bank digital currencies.
Yeah. CBDC.
You hear that term a lot.
We do.
CBDCs.
Yeah.
This isn't just theoretical anymore, though.
Right.
These banks are moving into real-world experiments.
That's exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
But there's something that often gets overlooked
What's that?
in all this excitement.
Okay.
And it's actually a
see.
crucial piece
Mhm.
to making all this work.
I'm intrigued.
The legal foundation,
Oh, yeah.
the legal side of all this.
You got to have the rules.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
The rules of the game.
We are doing a deep dive
Okay.
into a very specific type of CBDC,
Token-based CBDCs.
token-based.
Our main source material is a recent IMF fintech note,
An IMF fintech note.
which is really interesting.
I've heard good things.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's really important to understand that we're focusing specifically on token-based systems today
Right.
because they operate differently.
In what way?
Legally speaking, from account-based CBDCs,
Uh-huh.
which are more like
Yeah.
digital bank accounts
Right.
held directly at the central bank.
Right.
We'll probably do a whole other deep dive on that
At some point.
at some point.
Sounds good.
But token-based is where we are today.
Okay, so token-based versus account-based.
Yeah.
What's the legal difference?
Well,
Differences.
the IMF note
Yeah.
actually gives a really clear
Okay.
legal definition of
Yeah.
what token-based CBDC means.
Okay.
And this is important because
Yeah.
it's not just about the technology.
Right.
Legally,
It's defined as a form of money
money. Okay.
issued by a central bank.
Yeah.
And it's expressed in
Right.
an official monetary unit.
So like dollars or euros or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's the really key part.
Lay it on me.
The monetary claim on the central bank
Okay.
is actually incorporated
Okay.
in the digital token itself.
In the token.
So when that token is transferred,
Yeah.
that claim
That claim
goes with it.
goes with it.
And another really key difference,
Okay.
there's no current account relationship
Interesting.
between the central bank
Uh-huh.
and the person holding the token
At any given time.
at any given time.
Yeah.
So it's really different from how we normally think about money.
It is interesting. Yeah.
Like, say, with a checking account,
Right.
there's that relationship with the bank.
Yeah.
This is different. So this is almost like
Yeah.
a digital version of
Oh.
a physical banknote. You hand it over to someone.
Yeah.
They instantly have the value
Right.
of the claim.
Yeah.
The central bank doesn't have to update any records about who owns what.
No central intermediary.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Except, of course,
Yeah.
it's all digital,
Right.
not something you can hold in your hand.
Right. No physical thing.
So it's a little different.
Yeah,
But that's a
right.
good
It's a good starting point.
starting point for
Yeah.
understanding it.
I think so. Yeah.
It's like, think of it like a digital bearer bond.
A bearer bond. Okay.
But
because
because it is digital,
yeah.
it does present
Yeah.
unique legal challenges
That physical cash doesn't.
that physical cash
Yeah.
just doesn't have.
It doesn't have, right?
But you've got the core idea
I think so, yeah.
that the value
Yeah.
is linked to the token itself.
He's in the token.
So why should all of this matter to you?
Yeah.
Why should our listeners care
Good question.
about this?
Yeah, why wade into all these legal weeds?
Right. Why does it matter
Yeah.
if a CBDC is token-based or account-based,
Right.
or how the law decides to categorize
Categorize it.
these digital things?
Yeah, why does it matter?
It matters because if a token-based CBDC
Okay.
actually became
Uh-huh.
a common way that we used money,
Right, like every day.
like
Okay.
in our everyday lives,
Yeah.
the private law aspects,
Private law. Okay.
how these digital tokens are treated
Yeah.
legally in terms of who owns them,
Okay.
how you can transfer them,
Right.
whether you can use them as collateral.
For loans? Yeah.
All of that is
Yeah.
going to determine how smoothly this works.
Okay.
If the legal rules are not clear,
Yeah.
that could be a problem.
It could definitely create friction.
Right. People need to know
People and business.
their rights and obligations,
Absolutely.
and we need legal certainty.
Yeah, to really make it work.
Otherwise, the whole system risks collapsing,
Under its own weight.
basically.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if you weren't sure
Yeah, okay.
if you actually owned the money
The digital cash.
in your digital wallet,
Right.
or if a payment you made
Uh-huh.
was actually final
Yeah.
or irreversible,
Okay.
or What happens if the company that runs your digital wallet
provider
goes out of business?
Right. That'd be a problem.
That's a problem.
Big problem.
Huge problem.
Yeah.
It's not exactly confidence-inspiring.
It's not, no.
So that's why we're here today.
Okay.
To dig into the key legal questions that surround token-based CBDCs.
Token-based CBDCs.
We're going to look at the legal frameworks
Okay.
and think about whether these digital tokens can fit into existing categories we have.
Like property law, for example.
Like property law.
Yeah.
Or if we need entirely new rules.
New legal paths.
Brand new stuff.
Yeah, exciting stuff.
All right, so where do we even begin?
Well, the first thing that the IMF note points out is that token-based CBDCs present a whole new set of private law questions compared to account-based systems.
Account-based. Because like we said, those mostly fit into the rules for traditional bank accounts.
Traditional bank accounts.
We have centuries of legal precedent.
We know how those work.
We know how those work.
Yeah.
Token-based. It's uncharted territory.
So it's brand new, yeah.
Legally speaking.
So the first question then is about its legal nature.
Its legal nature.
Like, how does the legal system even classify this thing?
How do we categorize it?
Right.
And the note puts this right in the area of property law.
Property law.
So why is it so important?
Why is that so critical?
To figure out this classification.
Yeah, why does that matter so much?
Well, classifying token-based CBDC under property law is important because it impacts so many other legal areas.
Other areas, okay.
But think about it this way.
Okay.
How do you define who owns it?
Ownership?
How do you transfer ownership?
Transfer, okay.
What if you want to use it as collateral for a loan?
To secure a loan?
Is that even possible? What about custody?
Okay.
What if you give it to a third party?
A wallet provider.
To hold for you?
Yeah, like in a wallet.
What are your legal rights?
What are your rights, yeah.
And what happens if someone in the chain, like you, the person you're paying, or a custodian, becomes insolvent?
Goes bankrupt.
Goes bankrupt.
Yeah.
What happens to your money?
That's a big one.
That is a big one.
Yeah.
And even things like private international law.
Oh, wow.
Which deals with legal issues.
Yeah.
That cross borders are influenced by this.
By this classification.
By this fundamental classification.
Yeah, okay.
Different types of property. We have different legal rules.
Different rules.
For all of these situations.
For all of these scenarios.
So it's not just some abstract legal question.
No, it's very real.
This has real-world consequences.
Yeah, it's not just theory.
For how this all could work.
Practical consequences.
And the note lays out 3 potential ways that the law could classify.
Okay.
Token-based CBDC.
All right.
Under property law.
Under property law.
The first one is as a hybrid asset.
A hybrid asset.
So what does that even mean?
So what does that mean?
In this context, it basically means something that is recognized by the law as having characteristics of both tangible and intangible things.
Both tangible and intangible.
Tangible.
Physical objects.
Physical objects.
Like
tangible, like rights or claims.
Rights or claims.
Okay.
So the question here is, does a token-based CBDC have enough of a thing-like quality?
Even though it's digital. Even though it's digital, to be treated like a physical object.
Okay.
And the note actually reminds us
that
this kind of reasoning has been used before. For things like negotiable instruments.
Like a check.
Like a check.
Okay.
Or a promissory note. And dematerialized security.
Dematerialized securities.
Where your ownership is recorded electronically.
Electronically.
But it carries similar legal rights to holding a physical share certificate.
Interesting.
So the token itself, even though it's not a physical coin or banknote, could the law potentially see it as having this kind of virtual tangibility?
A virtual tangibility.
And give it the same legal characteristics as a physical item.
As a physical item.
That's the question.
I see.
And the IMF note suggests...
What do they say?
That while it's unlikely that token-based CBDC fits into existing categories.
Hybrid category.
For hybrid assets.
Yeah.
There's no reason.
There's no reason.
Lawmakers couldn't make a new one.
Create a new category.
A new type of hybrid asset.
Specifically for this.
Specifically for CBDC.
That makes sense.
Giving it those characteristics.
Interesting.
So what's the second possibility
The second option
for classification?
Yeah. The second option is to create a completely new category. A sui generis category.
Sui generis.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
It's just Latin of its own kind.
Of its own kind.
Its kind.
Okay, so it would be like, we're not going to try to force this new digital thing into an old legal box.
Yeah.
Instead, we make a brand new box.
We make a new box.
That fits it perfectly.
Just for this.
And the note says that this new category could be inspired by some of the recent DLT laws.
DLT laws.
Laws specifically made for technologies like distributed ledgers, which are the foundation.
It's the foundation.
For a lot of digital assets.
Yeah.
Including CBDCs.
Including potential CBDC?
Because these laws are already trying to figure out how to define and regulate these new forms of value.
Makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what about the third option?
Okay, option 3.
The third way to classify token-based CBDC.
Okay. The third option is that it ends up being classified as a pure yet novel intangible.
Pure yet novel intangible.
Yeah, so basically if if it doesn't fit the hybrid.
Or the sui generis. Then it just kind of falls into this intangible category.
Very tangible.
By default almost, but.
The note says there's a problem with that.
There's a problem.
You can't treat it.
It's like a standard.
It's like a normal.
Contractual claim.
Contractual claim.
If you did.
The
legal process for transferring it would be too complex.
Would be a nightmare.
It would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Imagine you have to formally assign your right.
Every time you made a payment.
To the cash.
Oh my gosh.
Every time you paid for something.
That would be terrible.
That just wouldn't work.
For everyday use.
It'd be like needing a mini contract.
A little contract.
Every time you buy a coffee. It just doesn't work.
Nobody would use it.
No.
So
if it is classified as an intangible asset, the law would need to create specific rules.
Bespoke rules.
To make it work.
To make it usable.
Rules that make it easy to use.
Right. Easy to transfer.
Smooth
and frictionless.
Like we have for bank accounts.
Or
for stocks and bonds.
Exactly.
And the note actually has a whole section in Box 2.
Box 2.
That gives examples of recent developments in different countries about classifying digital assets.
Interesting.
So internationally.
Yeah.
What's going on?
What's happening out there?
So Box 2 shows us that different countries are starting to recognize property rights over these new digital assets.
Digital assets.
Like, for instance, the U.S. has made changes to their Uniform Commercial Code
UCC
to address what they call controllable electronic records.
Controllable electronic record.
And Wyoming has really been leading the way.
Interesting.
They've made laws
that
classify different digital assets
under their UCC,
under their version of the UCC.
Okay.
The UK Law Commission,
is
even proposing a new category of personal property just for data objects, which would include things like crypto tokens.
Okay.
And we've even seen court rulings in places like New Zealand that recognize cryptocurrencies as a form of property.
Interesting.
And then in some countries, with civil law systems, like Liechtenstein, they have this blockchain act.
The blockchain act.
France has specific rules for securities held on DLTs.
Okay.
Switzerland has this idea of ledger-based securities.
Ledger-based securities.
And Japan changed their Payment Services Act after the Mt. Gox incident.
Right. That was a big one. Yeah.
So all of these are examples.
All around the world?
All around the world.
Yeah.
Of countries trying to figure out
how
to legally categorize these new digital forms of value.
You're grappling with it.
They're definitely grappling with it.
Yeah.
So once we figure out what a token-based CBDC is,
what it is
legally, the next question is, how are ownership rights held?
Okay. How do you prove you own it?
And how do you prove that you own it?
Okay.
And the note highlights the role of registries and ledgers.
Registries and ledgers.
In this, because the technology
because the technology inherently uses them.
Whether it's DLT or something else.
Whether it's a distributed ledger or something else.
Yeah, there's some kind of ledger.
There's some kind of record. So the question is, what is the legal role of the ledger in figuring out who owns the CBDC?
Okay.
So the note lays out
two extremes.
Two extremes.
Okay.
Two opposite ends of the spectrum.
All right, give me the first one.
The first one is that the registry or ledger is what they call constitutive.
Constitutive, okay. Of ownership.
Meaning?
Meaning that you only legally own the CBDC if it is recorded as belonging to you on that ledger.
On the ledger.
So if your ownership isn't on the ledger, you don't own it.
Legally speaking.
Legally speaking.
You got nothing.
You've got nothing.
I see.
This is kind of similar to how we think about land.
Land ownership.
Your name has to be
on the deed.
On the deed to legally own the land.
So the ledger is like the deed.
The ledger is like the deed.
Okay.
So that's one end of the spectrum.
Okay, what's the other end?
The other end is that the registry is merely evidentiary.
Evidentiary, okay.
So the ledger serves as proof of ownership.
Proof of ownership.
But your ownership rights could potentially exist even if there's a mistake.
A mistake on the ledger.
On the ledger.
Okay.
It's kind of like your bank statement.
I see, your bank statement.
It shows your balance.
Right.
But if there's an error, you still have the right.
You still have a right to your money.
To your money.
Even if the statement's wrong.
Even if the statement's wrong.
Okay, I get it.
And the note says the choice between those two models.
Between constitutive and evidentiary.
I was really connected to how we classify the CB.
I can classify it,
Like if we say it's a hybrid asset.
Okay, a hybrid asset.
Making the ledger the only way to determine ownership.
The sole determinant.
Could be a problem.
Yeah.
Because ownership of physical things can transfer without
a registry update.
Any formal record.
Right. Like if I hand you $1, there's no central registry that updates.
No one's updating a giant ledger.
Right.
So if it's sui generis.
Okay, sui generis.
Or a pure intangible.
Yeah.
A constitutive ledger might
make more sense.
A better fit.
Potentially.
But evidentiary could work regardless.
Regardless of the classification.
Out the classification.
I see.
So the note also talks about wallets.
Wallets.
Digital wallets.
Okay.
How do those fit in?
Yeah, how do wallets fit into all of this?
Well, if we say that token-based CBDC can be held.
Held by a third party?
By an intermediary.
A custodian.
Like a bank or a wallet provider.
Yeah, makes sense.
Then those wallets need to show who owns what.
Accurately reflect ownership.
Those wallet records have to be evidence of ownership.
Okay.
Especially if the provider has financial problems.
But that they go bankrupt.
Like insolvency.
Okay.
So the balance in your wallet should legally represent your claim to the CBDC.
Got it.
And this brings us to the connection between these individual wallets and the main registries and ledgers.
Main ledgers.
Because even in situations where intermediaries
like banks
hold client funds in what are called omnibus positions.
Omnibus positions, okay.
On the main ledger.
Yeah.
Like a shared account.
Like one big account.
For everybody.
Yeah.
The legal framework needs to make sure that you,
the individual user,
still own your portion of the funds.
Your specific portion.
Your specific portion.
Right, even though it's in this big pool.
Even though it's pooled together.
Yeah.
Because if the law only recognized ownership based on the top-level ledger, it wouldn't match what's in millions of user wallets.
This would be a mismatch.
It'd be a huge mismatch.
Yeah.
It'd be like the bank only recognizing the total amount in their vault.
The total.
And not how much each customer has.
Not the individual amounts.
So we need the law
needs to
recognize both the main ledger and the individual wallet.
The individual wallet.
As legally valid.
Valid.
So let's move on to actually transferring this digital cash.
Transferring it.
What rules do we need?
Yeah, what rules do we need?
To make sure that works smoothly
and efficiently.
And efficiently
every day.
In everyday transactions.
Yeah, like buying your coffee.
Like buying coffee.
Yeah.
So the main principle.
The principle here.
Is that when you receive money, digitally or physically.
Digitally or physically.
You should be the rightful owner.
Right.
Without having to investigate.
Without having to investigate.
Entire
history.
Of that money.
Right, like where it came from.
Like, was it stolen?
Yeah. Host speaker.